The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as Thomas Parker stared at the polished wood of his boss's desk. He felt his stomach tighten, sensing that something was terribly wrong. His boss, Jared McCulloch, looked at him with a mixture of disdain and feigned concern, a hint of satisfaction flickering in his eyes. "Thomas," Jared began, his voice low and sharp, "do you have any idea how much this mistake has cost us?" Thomas blinked in surprise. He had worked at Eversight Industries for over 20 years, handling countless orders without so much as a hiccup. His mind raced as he thought back to the client order he'd processed just a week ago. He was certain he hadn't made any mistakes. "I don't understand, sir. I double-checked everything," Thomas replied, his voice strained. He was met with a cold, unforgiving gaze. "The client received home products instead of business-grade materials," Jared snapped. "I checked the records myself. This is your responsibility." "But Thomas stammered, his pulse quickening. He was sure he hadn't made an error. Was there a mix-up in the system? He had been meticulous, as always. Jared cut him off. "Thomas, you've been making far too many mistakes lately. This isn't the first one, just the biggest. I'm afraid we have no choice but to let you go." The words hit Thomas like a punch to the gut. His lips parted, but no words came out. He wanted to defend himself, to ask for a chance to fix it, to explain. But he could see in Jared's steely gaze that it would be futile. After years of loyalty, he was being dismissed without warning, his reputation tarnished in the span of minutes. As he collected his things and walked out, a strange numbness overtook him. He replayed the meeting in his mind, trying to make sense of it. But the more he thought about it, the more a dark suspicion crept into his thoughts. Had he been set up? At home, Thomas was greeted by his young son, Jamie, whose face lit up as he saw his father home early. "Dad, you're home. Can we play catch?" Thomas forced a smile, though his mind was still reeling from the events at the office. He nodded, putting down his briefcase with an effort. "Sure, kiddo," Thomas muttered, trying to mask his unease. But as Jamie rushed outside to grab the ball, Thomas felt a weight in his chest. Inside, his wife, Elaine, was already preparing dinner. She looked up when he entered, her face softening with concern as she noticed the tension in his posture. "Hey, what's wrong?" she asked, wiping her hands on a towel. Thomas hesitated, then sighed deeply. "I've been let go." Her expression faltered. "What? Why?" He recounted the meeting with Jared, explaining how the mix-up with the order had led to his dismissal. Elaine listened intently, her brow furrowing in disbelief. "That doesn't make sense, Thomas. You've been with that company for over 2 decades, no mistakes ever. This sounds like something else." "I don't know what happened," Thomas replied, pacing the room. "I'm sure I checked everything, it just doesn't add up." Elaine took a step forward and placed a hand on his arm. "We'll figure it out. Maybe this is just a sign we need to take a step back, spend more time together. We could go on a trip, take a break." Despite his anxiety, Thomas couldn't help but feel a flicker of comfort at her suggestion. Still, the weight of the situation hung heavily on him. How could something so sudden and unfair happen after all these years? Before he could respond, his phone buzzed. It was from Carl, one of his colleagues at Eversight. "Thomas, you need to come back to the office. The CEO wants to see you right away." His heart skipped a beat. "The CEO," he muttered under his breath, the last person he expected to hear from. He looked at Elaine, who raised an eyebrow. "I don't know what's going on, but I'm going to go. Something's not right." She nodded. "Be careful." The drive back to the office felt longer than it was. Thomas's mind raced with questions. Why would the CEO want to see him? Was there some misunderstanding? Or had Jared, someone who had never liked him, set him up? When he arrived, he was ushered into the CEO's office without delay. Eleanor Harrington, the sharp-eyed CEO of Eversight Industries, sat behind her sleek, modern desk. Her presence was commanding, her posture immaculate as always. She looked up as he entered. "Thomas, I'm glad you could make it." Her tone was calm but carried a weight of authority. Thomas took a seat across from her, still unsure of what to expect. Eleanor's eyes studied him for a moment, her sharp gaze calculating. He could feel his palms start to sweat, his nerves on edge as he sat there, waiting for her to speak. "Jared informed me you were terminated earlier today," Eleanor said, her voice steady but tinged with something like concern. "But I have reason to believe there's more to this than what he's told me." Thomas blinked, taken aback. "More to it. But Jared said it was my fault, the order mix-up with the client. He said I've been making repeated mistakes." Eleanor's lips pressed into a tight line, and she leaned forward, folding her hands on the desk. That's what he told me to. But I've been reviewing our operations, and it seems there are discrepancies. Serious ones. She paused, letting the words settle. I need your help, Thomas. We need to fix this. His mind raced as he tried to process her words. Discrepancies? What do you mean? Eleanor's eyes narrowed slightly. The mistake with the order. That didn't come from your end. I've checked the logs. The order was entered correctly by you, but it was processed incorrectly on Jared's side. He's been failing to supervise the team properly, and this issue isn't just a one-off. There have been ongoing problems with inventory and fulfillment under his management. I need someone who can clean up this mess. Thomas's heart thudded against his ribs. This was the moment he'd been waiting for a chance to prove himself. But it also raised an uncomfortable truth. Jared's incompetence was causing chaos, and Thomas had been blamed for it all. He clenched his fists, the frustration boiling over. Why didn't Jared tell you this? Thomas asked, his voice tight with frustration. Why would he lie like that? He fired me without even giving me a chance to explain. Eleanor leaned back in her chair, her expression unreadable. I suspect Jared didn't want to admit his failures. He's not the easiest person to work with, as you know. But the truth is, he's been failing in ways that are becoming a liability to this company. And we can't afford that. We need you, Thomas. The realization hit him like a wave. You want me to come back, to help fix everything? Eleanor nodded. Yes, but not just as an employee. I need your experience, your attention to detail, and your knowledge of our suppliers, especially those overseas. Jared can't manage the international aspect of the business, but you can. Thomas felt a surge of pride, mixed with lingering bitterness. He had been scapegoated, his reputation damaged, but now he had an opportunity to turn things around. This was his chance to reclaim what he had worked for and expose the truth about Jared. He could feel the tide beginning to shift in his favor. All right, Thomas said, his voice steady now, I'll help. But I need to see the full picture. I want access to the order system and the logs. Eleanor gave him a quick nod. Of course, you'll have everything you need. As Thomas stood up to leave, a plan began to form in his mind. He wasn't just going to fix the orders, he was going to uncover everything, lay it all bare, and finally bring Jared's incompetence into the light. Over the next several days, Thomas dove headfirst into the backlog of orders, working tirelessly to clear up the mess that Jared had caused. With every order he reviewed, it became increasingly clear that the problems went deeper than he'd expected. Incompetent handling, poor communication, and neglect were at the heart of the issue. But there was more. Strange anomalies in the logs, errors that couldn't have been caused by anyone but Jared himself. Late one night, as Thomas sifted through the order system, he found it the smoking gun. A series of transactions, hidden deep within the logs, showed a pattern of tampered entries. The mix-up with the client order had been no accident. The system had been altered, but not by anyone in Thomas's department. No, these changes had been made by Jared in a desperate attempt to cover up his own mistakes. Thomas's pulse quickened as he read through the details. Jared had reclassified certain high-priority business orders as low-priority consumer items, then adjusted the stock quantities to fit his own narrative of blame. It was all there, clear as day. Jared had been systematically undermining the system to avoid responsibility. He'd created the chaos and then turned it on Thomas when the inevitable collapse occurred. Thomas knew he had to act fast. He immediately saved the evidence onto a secure drive and made his way back to Eleanor's office the next morning. His mind was set. Jared had to be exposed. When he entered Eleanor's office, she was on a call, but she signaled for him to sit. He waited, trying to steady his nerves. When she finally hung up, she looked at him expectantly. "Have you found anything, Thomas?" He didn't hesitate. "Yes, I have." He placed the drive on her desk, a quiet challenge in his eyes. "The order mix-up was not my fault. It wasn't even a mistake. It was sabotage. Jared manipulated the system, and I've got the proof." Eleanor's eyes widened as she took the drive. She plugged it into her computer, and the room fell silent as she examined the evidence. Minutes ticked by, but to Thomas they felt like hours. Finally she looked up, her expression grim. "This is worse than I thought," she said softly, almost to herself. "We've been underestimating Jared's behavior for far too long." Thomas nodded. "I've seen it for years. He's always been difficult, but I never imagined he'd go this far." Eleanor leaned back in her chair, her gaze fixed on the screen as she processed the implications. This isn't just about one faulty order. This could take down half the operation if we don't address it. I need to confront him." Thomas hesitated for a moment. "Are you sure? He's the CEO's son, Eleanor. You know what that means." She looked up at him, her eyes steely. "I'm not afraid of family connections, Thomas. This company's future is at stake. If Jared stays in charge, we're going under. I won't let that happen." Thomas's heart surged with respect. Eleanor had always been tough, but seeing her so resolute made him believe, for the first time in weeks, that things could be different. That afternoon, Eleanor arranged a meeting with Jared. Thomas stood by, waiting in the wings, as she confronted him with the evidence. At first, Jared was defensive, his anger rising quickly as Eleanor laid out the facts. But when she showed him the logs, his face paled. He tried to deny everything, but the proof was irrefutable. "You're fired, Jared," Eleanor said, her voice hard. "You've been sabotaging this company, and I won't allow it to continue." Jared's face twisted with rage. "You can't do this," he spat. "You know who my father is." Eleanor met his gaze unflinchingly. "Your father won't be able to save you this time. The board is already aware of your actions. They won't back you." Jared opened his mouth to argue, but then, seeing the cold finality in Eleanor's eyes, he sagged. His shoulders drooped, the bravado draining from him. "Get out," Eleanor said, her tone final, "and don't come back." As Jared stormed out of the office, Thomas couldn't help but feel a wave of vindication wash over him. It wasn't just about clearing his name, it was about stopping someone who had been a toxic influence on the company for far too long. Weeks later, the office was a different place. With Jared gone, things slowly began to return to normal. The backlog of orders was cleared, operations were running smoothly again, and Thomas's reputation was fully restored. Eleanor had made it clear to everyone that Thomas was an invaluable part of the team, and soon his role was expanded to oversee the entire supply chain department. At home, things were quieter now that the tension had lifted. Thomas and Elaine had taken a much-needed trip to an amusement park with Jamie, just as she had suggested. The simple joy of spending time with his family, free from the weight of his former job stresses, was exactly what Thomas needed. As they sat on the Ferris wheel, looking out over the sprawling city, Jamie smiled up at his father. "This is the best day ever." Thomas grinned, feeling the weight of the past few months finally lifting. He didn't have all the answers, but he had his family, and that was enough. "Yeah," he said, ruffling Jamie's hair. "It really is." As they descended from the Ferris wheel, Thomas caught Elaine's eye and saw the unspoken understanding between them. It was a simple, perfect moment. Sometimes, things had to fall apart before they could be put back together, and for Thomas, this was a new beginning. So if you love this story, be sure to subscribe, hit the bell, and comment below. Your interaction helps us grow.